This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, friends, to Awareness Explorers. I'm the co-host, Jonathan Robinson, and I'm with my friend and co-host,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
And today we're going to be exploring a topic close to my heart and hopefully close to your heart. I call it relationship awakening, and how actually the drug MDMA can be helpful in that process as well. But, many years ago, I was interviewing Ram Dass, and he said something that really struck me. He said that relationships are the new form of yoga. I asked him what he meant by that. And he said, well, yoga is our path of awakening to God, or one path. And he said in the modern age, he thought that relationships were a more updated path, because in relationships, you hopefully become better at opening to love, which is our true nature. But in order to do that, you have to see all the obstacles in the way and kind of sidestep them or something. And nothing will show you the obstacles to love more than a romantic, intimate relationship.
That's right. I mean, if you look at obstacles as opportunities to awakening, then being in a relationship is an embarrassment of riches.
Exactly. And both of us have been married for a long time. How long have you been married, Brian?
Oh, I don't remember now. Probably,
That means it's a long time.
yeah, 10 years, but we've been together for over 30 years.
Oh, wow. And I've been together with my wife for 28 years. And in that time, you go through, if you're interested in seeing the obstacles and seeing what allows you to open your heart and what allows you to go beyond the right, wrong ego dynamics that we often fall into and the trauma dynamics from our childhood. But as you know, Brian, besides being a relationship counselor, I recently came out with a book called Ecstasy for Couples, the subtitle, How MDMA Therapy Can Create More Love and Less Conflict in Your Relationship. And it's the first book on that topic ever written, from what I know. And one of the reasons I wrote it is because, marital counseling or couples counseling tends to be a really long, slow, painful slog. Have you ever been in counseling?
No.
Yeah, because it's a long, slow, painful slog most of the time. And by the time couples come to a counselor like me, they usually have had difficulty for about 6 years. And they're usually on the verge of divorce or not liking each other anyways. And then I'm trying to repair the relationship. And it's hard to help people who are at odds with each other. It's very hard to solve problems when people kind of aren't liking each other. They have past resentments. So I found this drug MDMA, known as Ecstasy or Molly, that can usually do about 2 or 3 years of therapy in one day. And I thought we'd talk a little bit about what leads to more openness and awakening in relationships in general, and how MDMA can help. So I just said a mouthful. What occurs to you right off the bat?
Well, I read your book, which is really good. And the thing that struck me about it is that it's actually chock full of really good couples advice, even without the MDMA part. But I'm curious, what is the actual method, or how does MDMA work in terms of helping couples to open up, to say, for example, to say things that they may have been afraid to say, or to be more allowing of the other person's habits and way of being?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, for normal couples that are having difficulty, there's lots of triggers and lots of agreements that certain conversations are too difficult to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
It might be sex, it might be money, it might be parenting, it might be infidelity, all these things. So MDMA reduces blood flow to the amygdala. So I noticed that as it reduces blood flow to the amygdala, all these topics that were really hard to talk about or really triggering become like talking about the weather.
Wow.
It's amazing to watch. And it also tends to be very heart opening. So, you know, when you're heart opened and you're fearless, then every topic becomes easy to talk about. There's no me versus them, which often is what happens in relationships. It's a sense of us. How do we deal with this? You know, what do I appreciate about you? What can we do about this situation? And it's much easier to solve problems in that. You know, I never have couples come into my office and say, we understand each other really well. That's why we want a divorce. But most couples have a very hard time understanding each other because their heart's not opened anymore. They're not able to listen because they get so easily triggered. So you kind of create a 5-hour window where none of that's there. And you can almost like do relationship surgery. Now, in the book, Ecstasy for Couples, I do have a lot of advice and exercises for couples that work better on MDMA, but they also work outside of that. The problem is that most couples won't do those exercises unless they feel connected or they feel open-hearted or they feel safe. So that's why I tend to only like to work with couples if they're wanting to take MDMA.
Wow. And also, I noticed that in your book, you talk about some of the problems, especially in heterosexual relationships, because men and women have different, I think you call it the 8 behaviors chart, or the chapter about love languages and the point system, and how different men and women give different values to different things that are sometimes opposite, like initiating hugs. Women give it a 45 and men only 5, but initiating sex, men give it a 75 and women only a 10, things like that. And so this is obviously one of the obstacles, when the sort of the base expectation of what's valued is so different.
Yeah, relationships are largely about being able to satisfy other people's needs effectively.
Mm.
But we don't necessarily know what those needs are because, I'm a man, my wife's a woman. We're different species. And, to some extent, everybody's a different species from whoever they're in relationship with. We have different needs, different trauma triggers, etc. And on MDMA, you can kind of see those more clearly. My wife loves shopping. I hate shopping.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once I really got that, that's like her greatest joy. I stopped commenting like, why are you spending money on that? Why are you doing that? Because I was keeping her from her joy. And I like to watch football. She thinks football is the most boring, stupid game she can imagine. But she now understands that brings me joy. And when you realize clearly what your partner needs, it makes it easier to give it to them.
Mm-hmm.
That's one example. And that point system, one that's really interesting is men tend to dismiss women's feelings a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And women consistently state that that's the most damaging thing their partner does on a consistent basis. And men don't even like, what's the big deal? Now, these are averages and everybody's different, but it's almost like, here's a story, which is pretty funny. I may have told it before. My parents had, a little bit of a rocky relationship, wondered why I was working with this drug in therapy and were curious about it. And I said, well, the only way to really know what it does is to, you have to have the experience. And to my surprise, my parents said, okay, can we try it? This was 35 years ago. The drug's still illegal, And I said, yeah, okay, well, I can get some for you. And I told them how to take it and set the right conditions. Well, a year later, I asked them if they'd ever taken the drug, and they said that they had. And I said, what happened? And they said, well, we took the drug and we waited like 10 or 15 minutes and nothing happened. And I was surprised. It usually takes about 45 minutes for it to take effect. But I said, well, what happened when you felt like it didn't work? And they said, well, we had nothing planned that night. So we ended up sitting on the couch, and then their eyes lit up and they said, well, because we didn't have anything to do, we just talked, and it ended up being the most wonderful evening of our 40-year marriage. And we ended up talking about how much we loved each other and how grateful we were for each other and what we were learning. And we'd had some arguments the previous week, and we just quickly solved those things. Like they were, we ran through our issues and solved a couple of things. And then we spent a couple hours, just cuddling on the couch. And I'm laughing the whole time, thinking, of course, this is the effect of the medicine, and they still refuse to think it was the medicine because it doesn't make you feel weird. It just makes you feel open-hearted, sober, and just clear-headed, So that's what it can do, and that's why for PTSD and relationship therapy, it can be a major breakthrough, really.
Yeah.
But, from those sessions, you learn actually what couples do need to do to better awaken through relationships.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do they need to do? I mean, I imagine that the main thing is that they need to have conversations which they may have thought of as difficult outside of the session. In fact, I think in your book you have the difficult conversation protocol.
Yeah, yeah. So they need to have difficult conversations at times. And number one thing I think they need is they need to really understand each other. One of the games I have people play is I call it the curiosity game.
Mm-hmm.
And the curiosity game is you ask your partner any question and they have to answer honestly. What are you curious about? So, I asked my wife what she loves about shopping. And, she described it in a way that, oh yeah, I could see that. And she asked me, what do I love about football? And I described it, and also what we like sexually, what are what really turns you on? Or
Mm-hmm.
just yesterday I had a conversation with my wife. I said, a lot of times when I'm humorous, you seem like you might not enjoy that. And we had a really good discussion about that. Like, what is it about that? So people need to understand each other. The difficult conversation protocol is a very structured way of having a difficult conversation. So it goes something like this. I'd like to have a difficult conversation with you. Is now a good time? The person says, yeah, or later. Then you say, what I fear might happen is that when I bring up this topic, you'll get angry at me or shut me down. What I hope would happen is that as we talk about this, that you and I get closer and we solve a problem that's kind of been nagging at both of us, and we can then really enjoy each other. What I'd like to talk to you about is blank, whatever the topic is. And then, what's your response? People don't like to be surprised. So having an avenue to talk about the things in the way of connection is important. And as you become more awake and you are less triggered, you're seeing things more impersonally, these conversations can happen more easily. Have you found that to be true?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. There has to be, it seems to me, a certain allowing, a certain acceptance. It seems to me that control is the biggest obstacle. Desire for the other person to be different from how they are.
Right.
And listening to them open-mindedly without the idea that it's wrong what they're describing seems to me really helpful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, people can have moments of total acceptance, through meditation or other awakening methods or through MDMA. But a lot of couples actually don't actually have that full experience ever without some kind of help, whether it be a spiritual technique or a medicine technique. And once you have that experience, it's easier to hit that target in the future.
Makes sense.
And the same thing with empathy. I was a very intellectual kid, and I didn't really know what empathy was until I took MDMA as like a 20-year-old. And then I said, oh, that's what that is. And I'm still not the most empathetic person in the world by any means, but at least I know what the target is. Men historically, for the last 299,000 out of 300,000 years, were basically just killers. We killed people in the next tribe, or we killed animals. But then women, 100 years ago decided they didn't want killers anymore. They wanted empathic, understanding men. And that's been a hard transition for a lot of men. But on MDMA, people get a sense of what that's about.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think will help with that is another thing from your book, which I found to be, simple but useful. I think you call it the acknowledgement formula.
Yeah.
Because often, I mean, even in the difficult conversation protocol, if you're listening to what they're saying, the other person who's just said it has to get the sense that they've been heard. Or in an argument where one person is upset about something, often the other person doesn't give the feeling that they've been heard and listened to. So you want to go into the acknowledgement formula a little bit?
Yeah, and the theory behind it is that people don't care what you have to say until they feel that you care.
Uh-huh.
So you have to first express that you cared and you understood them. And I found that this is like the foundational method that every couple needs to get better at. And I've seen people on MDMA get this really good in under a minute. I've seen people not on MDMA never get it once right in 5 years. So it really depends on whether you just really kind of understand it or willing to do it. So let's say, Brian, you tell me something that you complain about with me, like maybe you might have to make it up. You
You mean
just
something like, I hate it when I do all the cooking and you don't do the dishes, something like that?
Yeah. Okay, let's say you said that. Now, normally, unless somebody's very awake, they defend themselves right away. Right. And maybe not only defend themselves, but then blame you. I call it blaming, shaming, and complaining. And what's interesting about blaming, shaming, and complaining, if I asked you, how many times have you blamed your partner and the result was them saying, oh my gosh, you're right. Thank you for showing me the errors of my ways. How many times has he done that?
Like never.
Yeah, right. So 0 for 1,000. But people don't learn from that. They should learn, like, if you're batting 0 for 1,000, maybe that method is not working for you. So in the acknowledgement formula, if you're blaming me for something, not doing the dishes or whatever it is, I say, it sounds like, and then I summarize what you said in one sentence. Sounds like you feel like I'm not doing enough around the house. And that must be really frustrating and annoying. So it sounds like that must feel. That's all you got to do. And on MDMA, people can do that right away. Wow. In normal counseling, it usually takes me a year to get people to do that with each other.
Wow. Even such a simple formula as it sounds like blank, and that must feel blank.
Yeah, well, the formula is very simple, but behind the formula is you have to give up your desire to be immediately defensive and immediately need to be right.
Yeah.
You only have to give it up for like a minute, but that is not within most people's wheelhouse until they are either highly awakened or highly on this medicine. But once you see how well it works, then it's easy to keep on repeating it.
Mm-hmm.
I had when I was trying to do this, I came up with a little thing I said to myself. When my wife would complain about something, I would say, I can use the acknowledgement formula for 1 minute, or we can have a 3-hour argument.
Those do seem to be the choices, don't they?
Well, and half the time I chose the argument because, eventually I learned better.
Mm-hmm.
So, we do a lot of stupid things in our relationships that come out of our childhood wounding, our inability to express ourselves in a vulnerable way, and they create all kinds of problems. But it's very hard to see those obstacles, our blind spots, and we're not very good at taking in that information from our partner.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's better to take that information in from a counselor or that you see it yourself as you're doing it.
Mm-hmm. So MDMA takes away the desire to defend yourself. That seems somehow magical.
Yeah, yeah. It is somewhat magical. It is pretty close to magic in that way, that I have couples who like are fighting like cat and dogs in the session before they take MDMA. And then on MDMA, it's like, yeah, I do that. I really, have a habit of doing that. It's really self-destructive. And like, that would be the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
We take things so personally normally,
Mm-hmm.
but to a large extent, we're really highly conditioned, programmed people from our childhood and our parental situation. And that becomes so clear to us as you become more present. You see, oh, I'm triggered by this, I'm triggered by that. Wow, there's nothing going on here. I'm just constantly triggered, but
Mm-hmm.
and you need that space. And the MDMA or meditation can create that space.
Have you had people who have gotten to that space through meditation alone without MDMA?
Very rarely.
Mm-hmm.
Even highly awakened people, when they're in the cauldron of relationship heat,
Mm-hmm.
they sometimes I work with even well-known meditation teachers, and usually they can't in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Or I know somebody really well who's a highly awake being, and he often loses it. His name's Jonathan Robinson, and I've worked with him for a number of years, and he's even written books on this subject. And still, he can lose it, not often, but maybe 10% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always an ongoing thing, and just yesterday, my wife and I had a really good discussion of something I was doing that was really bothering her. And I usually don't get defensive. I've kind of gone beyond defensiveness now, but I wasn't seeing this blind spot in myself until she could point it out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard for most people to learn about their blind spots from their partner.
Yeah.
Not that they're not there, it's just they're not seeing it. There's been 3 times in my relationship with my wife where we were kind of thinking about separating.
Mm-hmm.
And each of those times we took MDMA and quickly overcame that issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you about one time, because it was pretty interesting and surprising. About 10 years ago, I think this was the last time we had a problem like that. My wife was mad at me like all the time for like 3 months. And, for little things like, you close the door too loud, and she'd get livid, and we didn't know what was going on. So I have a therapist friend, and I actually hired him to live with us for 3 days to watch what was going on.
Wow. And you weren't on your best behavior in front of?
No, well, after in 3 days, we kind of wanted him to see
Right.
what was going on. So we tried to be as normal as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So after 2 days, he said, I don't know what's going on, because your wife is really angry all the time at you. And you don't seem to be doing anything that, is really deserving of that. So what I suggest is that you both take MDMA together.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did. And it came out. There's another thing about relationships. Sometimes you don't really know what's going on. There's always below the surface stuff going on. So it ends up 4 months previous, my wife's aunt had died, who she was very close to. But she had been too busy to meet her or go to her in her last week. And she was angry at herself for being the type of person that didn't do that. And she was just really horrified by that, and did a lot of crying while I held her.
Right.
And her anger was all gone, and there was no problem afterwards.
Wow. What a great story.
And neither she nor I nor our counselor had any idea that that was the underlying issue.
Mm-hmm.
So, given a year or two of therapy, you might uncover that,
Mm-hmm.
but you might not. And, in studies about human happiness, all of them point to that the quality of your life is most impacted by the quality of your relationships.
Yeah.
And yet most people have had less than an hour of clear instruction or tools to help their relationship.
Mm-hmm.
We have Neolithic brains trying to navigate technological stress and relationship intricacies. Used to not be a problem. You were dead by 20, you tried to have a kid at 15 and then you were dead. But now people are trying to have relationships for decades. That's a new issue. And we're not given the tools to deal with that, really.
Well, that's really one of the amazing things about your book. As I was reading it, I really was struck by how practical the advice is in it. And sometimes it's the kind of stuff that you think, oh, this is so obvious. How come I never thought of doing this before? And obviously it's because we have automatic defensiveness and and what did you say? Blame, shame, and
Complaining.
yeah,
Blame, shame, complain.
yeah, blame, shame, complain is almost on autopilot when that happens, and that has to be disrupted. And there's a lot of ways that you talk about that can do it.
Yeah. I was recently at a 6-day Tony Robbins seminar. It was very good. And he would work with individuals in the audience. And people would go into their story. And everybody has their story. You have a story about your partner. I have the story about my partner. And our stories interfere with what is needed and what are the possibilities in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things Tony Robbins would do is always interrupt people's story. So they'd be talking about, oh, my partner, blah, blah, blah. And he'd say, is your nose always that color? or some other non sequitur, and people would try to get back to the story, and he would just keep interrupting their story with, "You have the most beautiful eyes," and what was interesting is, he would say that your story in the moment that you're always running is the main thing that's keeping you from presence and connection. So find some way to interrupt your story. Well, most people can't do that to themselves, you know. Now, how is it with your partner, Brian? Do you try to interrupt you? I mean, what do you notice in your relationship in terms of you using some of your awakening methods?
Yeah, I mean, at first we didn't. At first we just went through our own stories and tried to convince each other's stories. And then we talked about it. We talked about how the automatic, the knee-jerk response is to go into the story about it. And then we decided, we just talked about this. We said, what if we dropped the story? What if we looked at how the emotions felt in the body?
Yeah, yeah,
And we both grew by just doing that. We wouldn't always remember to do it, but over time, you remember more and more often.
yeah. And the good thing about feelings and body sensations is you can't disagree with them. If you say, "I feel heaviness and a sadness in my chest," I can't say, "No, you don't."
Right. That's
You know,
right. You can easily invalidate feelings that have an interpretation to them.
right,
Like, I'm
right.
feeling this way because that's easy to negate, to invalidate. But you're right. You can't invalidate, there's a knot in my stomach. Yeah,
Hmm.
right. There's not. No, there isn't. But you can say, but there shouldn't be. You shouldn't feel that way. I mean, the dangerous, the little stone in the shoe on that one.
Yeah. And so you have to say, well, kind of like Byron Katie's approach, uh, you should feel that way. How do I know? Because you are feeling that way.
Right. Yes, that's the other thing that we've
It
talked
makes
about.
total sense that you're feeling that way because you're feeling that way. I
That's
don't
right.
understand how you got to that place, but you
Right.
probably have a reason.
Well, that's another technique. Yeah, I don't understand, but I acknowledge that what you say is a true description of your experience.
Yeah, yeah. So, in relationships, if you think of it as a path to love, as a path even to devotion,
Mhm.
then there's a embarrassment of riches of what's in the way of that. And the more you awaken, or the more you take something like MDMA, where you can create that space where you see more clearly, then you can go into some of the real deep work, like forgiveness work, or talking about regrets, or talking about difficult conversations. Or even I've had couples on MDMA where they had argued about an infidelity or argued about money for decades, and in an hour it was all solved.
Wow.
So it's just another technology that, like other technologies, it gets a result more quickly. uh, Even though I'm a therapist, talk therapy with couples often is really, really not very good at getting the results that I want. At least not. I'm very impatient, so I just found I didn't want to work with a couple for 2 years to get them back to a place of doing okay.
Yeah, well, I can understand that.
What triggered this is, in 1997, I wrote a book called Communication Miracles for Couples, and I was on Oprah and other shows, and it became a bestseller. So I started doing a lot of couples counseling then,
Hmm.
and just finding that was a very slow process. And of course, I was doing my MDMA work at the time as well, and just found I got a lot better results, and 100 times quicker. Um, but what was interesting to me was that the couples that learn a couple of key skills can use their relationships more for learning. And the couples that can't learn those key skills never do.
Mhm.
And it seemed weird that the number one key skill, the foundational one, was the acknowledgement formula. Because people won't listen to you until they feel heard.
Right.
And so I put a lot of emphasis on that. And then some exercises like, saying, it's very poignant when you see couples that have had closed down their hearts, reopen their hearts in vulnerable share. If you look at the word intimacy, it has the instructions in it, into me see, and a lot of times through our childhood hurts and our relationship wounding, we close down our vulnerability. But being a free being is being fully vulnerable in a certain way, fully yourself in that moment.
That's right. And it seems hard because we often go into our relationships because we think that we're going to get validation. We think we're going to get approval. We're going to get love. We're going to get all the things that we were missing that our egos thought was lacking in ourselves. And then maybe we might get that in the honeymoon period. And then we don't get that for a while, or we stop getting it. And instead, we get the other person's agenda, and we realize that they may not be the same. But when you flip it, and instead of imagining what you're going to get, and start thinking about what do you have to give,
Mm-hmm.
that can help. I think that's maybe the number two most important thing in the relationship. I think the number one is the acknowledgement that I am responsible for my own happiness and it's found within. And then I share it with the other, as opposed to I'm going to get happiness from the other.
Right. And that's where awakening comes in, that if you can, two half people trying to have a relationship is 1/4 of a person, but two whole people, 1 × 1 = 1. And most people don't, they do go into relationships to get rather than to give. And of course, you do want to get some things from your partner.
Oh, sure.
But if that's your whole focus in the relationship, it probably is not going to go well for very long.
Yeah, exactly. And the sharing attitude colors the getting. Because
Mm-hmm.
yes, sure, we want to get comfort, we want to get soothing, we want to get understanding, we want to get, but when it's done in an attitude of sharing, as opposed to, you have everything and I have nothing, and I'm going to get everything I need from you. That's a recipe that's a non-starter.
Yeah. It's not talked about a lot, but for the first time in history, the majority of Americans are not in a relationship.
Wow.
And not only that, but the average relationship in America now lasts 2 years. So it's really kind of an emergency situation. We always have an epidemic of loneliness, but you don't get a lot of couples that are extremely happy.
Mm.
And being that romantic relationships are the number one factor, much more than money, more than health, more than job, in determining our happiness, it's really kind of almost like a taboo subject that people aren't talking about this. And we need all the help we can get, whether it's with MDMA or therapy or good techniques or books or podcasts like this. I'm surprised that more people don't put more energy into learning about it, what makes it successful.
Yeah, I'm surprised too. Although I do understand it because culturally, it's actually ingrained in us through everything from movies to books to just our peers and what they talk about and what songs they listen to about about how I'm going to find that perfect person, and then my life is going to be happy ever after. And and the perfect person just simply doesn't exist. You know, you can have, I mean, it's great to have similar interests and to be compatible in certain ways. That's certainly a great starting point. But I think people have the have a like have the idea that somehow their partner needs to reach these unreachable goals, reachable, these qualities that the standards are so high that that you just can't meet them. And 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 that makes them think that the problem with the relationship is in the other person.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
really it is, to me, it's all about how much do I accept, understand, how open I am, how vulnerable I can be, how much I can share, how much I can empathize.
Relationships are really the best mirror for knowing ourselves.
Yeah.
It's hard to see your obstacles if you're just going about your day, but in an intimate relationship, it's a mirror. And if you spend your whole time telling the mirror how dirty it is, you're not getting anywhere, because it's a mirror. So, it's really, I think, one of the best and underrated paths to awakening. And anything that helps you to make use of a relationship in that way, whether it be MDMA or other methods, is really a spiritual boon. I think most people don't look at it that way. They don't make it as part of their spiritual path. But if you want to heal your childhood wounding, you want to see yourself, you want to open your heart in challenging situations, it doesn't get better than an intimate relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought it back to this. You talked a few minutes ago about relationships and awakening, and you emphasized story. And I thought that was a really good example, because one of the biggest obstacles to knowing ourselves is awareness, or the topic of non-dual spirituality and self-inquiry, is seeing through the stories, or not listening to the stories, or seeing that the stories are not true, or they're not helping. They're the veils that are actually hiding the love that's already here, the allowance that's already here. So I guess my question is, it's twofold. How can relationships help with that process? But also, does MDMA help with that process, or does it sort of simply mimic having arrived there? Or if you understand my meaning.
Well, it does mimic having arrived there, but people need to have an experience before, and a sense of what the target is
Mhm.
before they can get back there. If you're blindfolded and you're trying to hit a target, you're never going to hit it. But if you say the target's, at 2 o'clock to my right, then you can. And MDMA does give people that experience of forevision. Your first question about stories is, it takes practice to let go of your story.
Mhm.
And you get a lot of practice in relationships. You call that forgiveness.
Yeah.
Call it just letting go of your story, letting go. And to the extent that you can do that repeatedly, consistently over many months or years, you're going to have a lot of love. To the extent that you get caught up in your story, you will not have that experience. So you get immediately rewarded to the extent that you can do some of these spiritual openings with your partner.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in my way of looking at it, awakening, especially as we talk about it on this program, awakening to our true nature as allowing loving awareness, is synonymous with unconditional love. That's what it is. That's our
Yeah.
nature. And it's veiled by stories, by thoughts about the past, by worries about the future. by the things that we need to fix in ourselves and the other.
Yeah. So, if you want unconditional love, see all the conditions you put on it and then let them go.
Yeah, right. There's the recipe. Maybe easier said than done, but it's a project so well worth taking on.
It's interesting. Ecstasy for Couples, my new book, which you made into an audiobook. And thank you, Brian. So it's available that way as well. This is the first book ever written on that subject. And in the 70s, that's how MDMA became popular. Therapists started using it with couples and they found it worked amazing. And then it got into the dance rave scene and the whole thing. But nobody had ever written a book about how ordinary people could use this to heal and enhance their relationships. So I'm excited about its possibilities, about bringing more acceptance, love into the world, and hopefully helping people see what is in the way of that on a more consistent basis.
Yeah, yeah. And one other thing about the book that I want to ask you about was actually there are two things. One is you talk about rules, trust, and agreements that you have an agreement with each other, and you have a formula which you call the RARE, RARE formula. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's always little breaches of trust in relationships, ranging from big ones like infidelity and such to like not showing up on time for dinner, and you have to learn how to repair those things.
Mhm.
Just like if you hurt your body, you slash something, you got to, know how to heal that.
Yeah.
And so I came up with a simple formula called RARE, which is an acronym for take responsibility. Let's say I don't show up for a meeting with you. Hey, Brian, I want to acknowledge that I didn't show up for a meeting with you like I said we would, and that was both inconsiderate and probably really inconvenient for you.
Mhm.
The A then is apologize. And I apologize to you for that. That was really unfair. And I'm sure a little bit hurtful to you. The R is then request information. So, what do you need from me to feel better about what happened so that we can repair that sense of rift that may have happened from my being late? Because different people need different things. And then the E stands for entrust a new commitment. Well, I want to confirm that in our next meetings, I'm going to do everything possible to be there on time, if not early, so that doesn't happen again. That's a very simple formula. The other formulas in the Ecstasy for Couples book, these are simple skills that we never learn that we really should learn because knowing how to navigate that in a more awakened, conscious way that works is really key to not just spiritual awakening, but just happiness in general.
Yeah, it seemed that way. And I said it earlier, but if you, our listeners, um, have some fear or some compunction about taking MDMA, there's tons of advice in this book that's just useful on its own, even without it.
Yeah, and it's really the same stuff. That just that MDMA is one accelerator to all the other techniques.
Right, right. It sounds like it smooths the road. It takes away it takes away the underlying resistance to them.
Yeah, yeah, and resistance is the thing that keeps us from awakening.
Yeah, right, exactly. So we've really come down to the crux of the theme of this episode.
Yeah, yeah. So hopefully we said some stuff that is useful to people and some exercises. They can go to ecstasyforcouples.net to find out more and get a bunch of free stuff that they put in their email there. I have something called the 12 questions to instant intimacy, and people get that for free, which is really fun. So, really our goal is to bring more love, acceptance, peace, and connection in the world, then this is one of those paths.
Great. So
That was fun.
Yeah. It was fun to talk to you about it. And it's a fun book.
So to our listeners, if you want to reach out, feel free to do that. And if you found this helpful, feel free to pass it on to your friends, neighbors, family. Until next time, keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.